Now joined by TSN Hockey insiders Chris Johnston and Pierre LeBrun. Gentlemen, today Keith Pelley confirming Brendan Shanahan will not be replaced. There's no new president coming in. So Chris, what does this mean for how the front office is going to operate moving forward?
Well, I don't think it's a surprise to learn that Brad Treliving is going to have more of a say as the general manager. But what I took away from this is that head coach Craig Berube is going to have a little bit more influence, power, say, however you want to frame it, in this operation than a typical NHL coach would. Take, for example, the fact that Craig Berube has already had dinner with Keith Pelley. You have Pelley mentioning what an asset he can be to the organization. And so essentially by eliminating a key person from the executive structure, it makes the group a little tighter. And part of that group is a head coach. And so that is, there's a few head coaches around the league that have a direct line to ownership that have those kind of discussions. But clearly Berube will be part of the decision making going forward. And you'd have to think that means player input and, a big say in basically the direction of the team entering this critical offseason.
Yeah, and I don't think it's nothing that Keith Pelley publicly expressed his support in Brad Treliving. This could have gone, let's face it, a different way when you're firing the person in Brendan Shanahan who brought in the GM in Brad Treliving. But instead, Keith Pelley wanting to, in fact, work on his relationship with Brad Treliving. It's going to be more of a day-to-day thing between those two guys as Keith Pelley fills the void of Brendan Shanahan that way on the hockey side. But what's important to me here, I think, is that Brad Treliving now also has more power, as CJ just talked about with Craig Berube, and he has to prove what he can do with that power. Brad Treliving, I believe, has 2 more years left on his contract. So I think this next 12 months is a really important time for Brad Treliving. How does he put his further stamp on this roster? How does he impress Keith Pelley, his new day-to-day boss? How does all that flesh out as we go into next year? These are really important times for Brad Treliving, but it's also an opportunity for him. Who knows? As I asked Keith Pelley, are you going to add a president of hockey operations title to Brad Treliving over the course of time? And Keith Pelley said, hey, it's just day one.
Pelley said he was impressed with how Treliving has kind of remade the defense, the goaltending, gave him his props there. Also gave the Florida Panthers their props, saying, hey, they're having their way with the Carolina Hurricanes right now. They're a pretty good team. So in terms of what just happened there, he made sure to point that out. He also weighed in on the idea of pressure, right? We heard the Panthers talking a lot about the pressure here in this market and how that may have impacted the Leafs negatively. What did you make of what he had to say about that, Chris?
Well, look, he wants to lean right into it as a positive thing, and who can blame him? You have to remember, Keith Pelley views the sporting world not through the lens of the NHL or the NBA, MLS. I mean, this guy lived in Europe for 10 years. He's been around European soccer. He was involved with organizing the Ryder Cup and ran the European Golf Tour, and he has seen truly big global sporting brands up close and personal. And as much as, yes, there's a lot of microphones and commentary around the Leafs. I mean, this is nothing compared to Real Madrid. I mean, even here in North America, the Yankees, the Cowboys, there's other organizations that get more of that. And so, for Keith Pelley, he talks of seeing the tribalism of sports in Europe and wants to see that, recreated here. So for sure, he doesn't like this talk about pressure being an issue for the team. It's pretty clear, though, that what happened in Game 7, specifically with the Leafs in their series with the Panthers, impacted this decision. But, he's not something he's going to shy away from. And in fact, he's going to want to build an organization that puffs its chest out and embraces that.
Yeah, and listen, there's no shame in losing the Florida Panthers. They may repeat as Stanley Cup champions, but it's the manner in which the Leafs went out again. Let's be clear about that. And it's not just about this year. Brendan Shanahan was here for 11 years, 9 consecutive playoff appearances, which is not nothing, but ultimately falling short when it mattered most. And to lose and get absolutely plastered at home in Game 7 from talking to someone in the organization absolutely played into this decision not to renew Brendan Shanahan. But it also speaks to this. I mean, is there a world in which MLSE could have maybe tried to extend Brendan Shanahan by a year and maybe delay some of these decisions? And the answer is yes. There was a conversation had about that, but here's the problem. Brendan Shanahan's not interested in signing a 1-year extension. Either you sign him again to a real contract and commit to him again, or you do what you did yesterday, which is let him walk.
Pelley said change is natural, but change is hard. So maybe a hard question here, Pierre, but what does the change look like for the Leafs moving forward?
Well, this will shock you on day, what day is this? We're going to talk about Mitch Marner again. That's the biggest domino. Mitch Marner, as CJ has said many times, and I back him, it's 99% I think that he's headed to market right now. It could be a change of heart, but that's what it sounds like to us. And so from this day on, now that Brad Treliving has this new day-to-day relationship with Keith Pelley, that's a major area of focus for them. How do they replace Mitch Marner? What do they do with that cap money? The trade route, free agency, everything that revolves around that piece that is going out the door, That's the number one priority right now for Brad Treliving.
For sure, but look, John Tavares is a free agent. I would think we're talking about change. I would think that there's going to be a world where he gets a new contract. I know those discussions are meant to get going here in the very near future with his camp. There's just some other parts of this. Like you come away from this press conference, it's clear this team has to take a step forward. So they got to the 7th game of round 2 this year. I mean, if they're not at least that far and beyond next season, I would think we're having another one of these press conferences. So Brad Treliving has a big summer ahead of him to remake this roster. They got more cap space than they have, which is a good thing. The bad thing, so does everybody else. And so I think it's going to be a very competitive market for players this offseason around the NHL.
Treliving not here today. He was at his daughter's graduation. We do expect to hear from him in the days ahead. Chris, you and I will be all over that. Pierre, you're off to Edmonton.
Sure am.
Safe travels. Enjoy games 3 and 4 of the Oilers and Stars. And Chris and I will have things covered here on the Leafs Beat.